All right, there's a renewed debate over how responsible a parent should be for their child. This is coming from a man in Georgia who is just sentenced to 15 years for his son shooting up a school. Here's the judge at the sentencing.
None of the crimes that you're convicted of require mandatory prison. On September 4, 2024, lives and families were forever altered. You are the but for you failing to get cult help, but for your failure to remove access to the guns. This doesn't happen. September 4th would have been a normal day. You didn't intend to commit these crimes that you've been convicted of. But the loss here is profound.
All right, the landmark case test, just how far the law can go in holding parents criminally responsible for a mass school shooting. Bringing in criminal defense attorney now Dwane Cates to discuss. An important fact to keep in mind here, the father did buy the son a gun a couple of months after cops showed up at the house because the son, Colt Gray, had threatened to shoot up a school. So much so the cops found out about it. They came and checked it out. Then months later, the dad buys him a gun. Dwane, do you think the father should be held responsible in the manner that has just been handed down?
Well, that's something in law we call bad facts. I mean, that's a bad fact for the father. I mean, he was warned that his son was going to do something like this. And for him to buy him a firearm at that point is gross negligence. I mean, it fits the definition. Now, being a defense attorney, I don't like people being charged with crimes for things that they didn't do or they didn't intend to do. But the law can punish you for gross negligence, and you can be punished criminally for it.
Well, I mean, do you think this case somehow creates some sort of legal precedent where, you know, it's more likely for parents to become criminally liable when their child commits a crime like this?
I think it does. I mean, we've gone down the road. Now, there's no actual precedent set by this where any other court or any other prosecutor or agencies is bound to charge people in this kind of situation, you know. But the fact that this was a successful prosecution is going to give them, you know, the fuel they need to do this in the future. Now, I think it needs to be in a rare and an extreme occasion, like in this case where the kid had a shrine to a school shooter, was warned that his son might be a school shooter, and then he goes out and buys the child an AK-47. I mean, I think those are pretty extreme facts, and I think it needs to be limited to facts like that.
Yeah, well, just to set the facts straight, it was an AR-15, not an AK-47. But
AR-15,
point well understood. Yeah, the situation here is interesting. You know, I have a teenage son. I bought him a rifle. It is locked up. He can only access it with me. The ammo's not even in the same place. So, you know, in that case, he goes and does something dumb. You know, that would be a situation where there were a lot of measures taken to prevent that. Not that he ever would, God forbid. But the point here is, where does the parent's responsibility begin and the child's responsibility end here? I mean, is 15 years excessive to you? I understand the negligence and really bad parenting, but is 15 years excessive? I don't know the answer to that. I would love to know from your expertise how you see it.
I do think it's excessive. I mean, again, you know, you want to send a message, but I don't know that 15 years is necessary to send that message. You know, I think 3 or 4 or 5 years in prison would have done what was needed to be done. However, you know, you have very angry victims that have profound loss, and after doing this for a long time, you know, they always talk about making the victim, you know, getting closure for the victims. You know, it really doesn't provide closure. Nothing's ever going to make that pain go away. Nothing's ever going to help them. And you know, and so I think excessive prison sentences may make everybody feel good for a little while, but that wears off pretty quick.
Yeah, 2 students, 2 teachers were killed. We just showed you the photos there, and certainly, you know, for the victims, you understand you want the maximum amount of accountability that you can get. I think, could this be a wake-up call for parents, though, Dwane? Let's turn it into a positive learning opportunity here. What would you say to parents out there as a way to avoid this kind of disaster for everyone involved?
If your child is going to be around guns, make them a responsible gun owner. I mean, I used to hunt by myself when I was 6. Of course, I grew up in Wyoming, where you're issued a firearm at birth. But I was taught from a very young age, you don't ever point the gun at anything you don't intend to kill. And I was taught. Right. I took safety classes in the Boy Scouts, and I tell you, my parents kept an eye on me, and had I started building a shrine to school shooters, okay, I wouldn't have had a gun. Okay, it would have been gone. There were rules, and they were very strict rules. But, and that's what's got to happen. There's got to be oversight from the parents. Part of the other problem is these third-party shooter games, first-person shooting games, where, you shoot people and they just jump back up. And these young people don't understand that when you shoot something, it dies and it never gets back up. And I think that, I don't know how you fix that. I think it's got to be parenting. I think it's got to be done in the home.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be very intentional with your children, paying attention to everything they're consuming and they're saying and they're viewing. It's all so important from the standpoint of knowing what your kids are up to. And I think this is just a horrific and terrible tragedy of all those things happening, and unfortunately 4 people paid for it with their lives. Dwane Cates, thank you for being with us today.